Hello everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen and view this presentation on restorative practices with, of course, an infusion of EdTech to help students make changes behaviorally in the classroom. My name is Lauren Owens. I'm the assistant to the principal at Desert Willow Elementary. I've been in Vail for 12 years teaching 5th grade, being an SAT, and now I have the privilege of being at Desert Willow. Our objective today we will identify restorative practices that empower students to make behavioral changes on their own. As I'm sure you are experiencing in your own classrooms, students need more and more direct instruction and guidance when it comes to solving interpersonal conflicts or even issues with peers or teachers or even parents at home. And this presentation and the tools I'm going to share are going to hopefully help students have more and more skills to solve problems independently. When we're looking at the ISTE standards, this applies both to a student standard and an educator standard. If we're looking for students, this would be considered empowered learner, where students leverage technology to take an active role in choosing, achieving, and demonstrating competency in their learning goals. And you can see here that it's broken down by grade level band. When we're talking about learning goals for this objective, I would say it's more whole child learning and those personal skills versus an academic standard. For the ISTE educator standard, the teacher or the grown-up in this situation would be a facilitator, where the job of the grown-up is to foster a culture where students take ownership of their learning goals and outcomes both in independent and group settings, meaning that students can express their feelings independently but also solve problems that typically show up in a group, of 2 or more people. Our agenda today is as follows. We're going to start by spending a little bit of time talking about the definition of restorative justice and what restorative practices can look like. Then you will have access to several different links of podcasts and videos and articles all about this topic that you can explore in your own time. And then, of course, we'll dive into some tech tools that might help students when they're in these difficult situations. Here you'll find the QR code as well as the link to this presentation, and that's for your reference and also so that you're able to click on everything in your own time. So for Bellwork, this Bellwork slide is a Google Slides document, and the link can be found in the presentation or also in the Schoology folder where all the resources are. When you click on this link, a forced copy will show up for you so that you can make edits as necessary. So I already did that. I'm going to jump over to the Bellwork. As you can see here, it's a Google slide, as I said. And the purpose of this Bellwork is to reflect as an adult, how do you solve conflicts and what factors might lead to behavior change. So it says, think of a time when you've made a mistake, learned a lesson, and then did not repeat that mistake. Why do you think you never made that mistake again? Then it says, move the check marks, which are here, to show your response. So you can see there's 6 options. It says, I was never in that scenario or situation again. My choice impacted someone else. Someone told me how they felt. Something else. I stopped communicating with that person or people involved, or I've never made a mistake. So the idea here as grown-ups, or you'll see this is mirroring how we use it for kids, is they think and they move. So maybe I've done something else and maybe someone told me how they felt. So that's the Bellwork. If I jump back here, when people were participating live, we took a poll to see what their responses were, and it was pretty interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to this Mentimeter so you can see the results. So what people did is they just checked which of those 6 options they selected. And as you can see, 45% of people chose that they didn't make that mistake again because their choice impacted someone else. 30% of people said someone told me how they felt. And as you can see, there's a very few amount of people that said, like, I stopped talking to those people entirely, or I was never in that scenario again. However, in a school setting with our students, we know that generally they're going to be around the same kids or same grown-ups over and over, and that the situations often rise again and again. So our goal here is to equip students with some tools to restore damage that has been done to relationships through conflict or issues that come up throughout the school year. So that was our bell work. I'm going to go ahead and jump back to our presentation here. Okay, I really liked this quote. It says, restorative justice and practices prioritize healing and accountability, creating a positive school culture where every voice is heard and valued. When students make a mistake or if they have a conflict, typically in a traditional type setting, the response would be punitive. Restorative justice really seeks to mend and repair relationships so that not only can students share their grievances or why they're upset, but they can also hear how their choices impacted someone else. So if we think about traditional discipline, or if even you're reflecting on maybe your classroom rules and procedures or your school's code of conduct, students are typically, if they've made a mistake, excluded from an activity or from the classroom or even the school, depending on the infraction. And again, it's punitive, where that learning, that mending and healing typically isn't prioritized. When we think of restorative practices, to be restorative means to believe that decisions are best made and conflicts are best resolved by those directly involved in them. Meaning, if two students have a conflict which then escalates into a physical altercation, the best way to prevent that from happening again is having those two students resolve the issue instead of putting a grown-up in the situation and deciding for them how it's going to be resolved. This is just another visual comparing the two things. So when we're talking about traditional discipline, students typically get to be passive. They know that, oh, I made a mistake. This is what's going to happen. They don't really have a voice or choice in how the conflict gets resolved. Again, typically it means exclusion or being removed. And that time where students get to really see or hear how their decision impacted others is left out. When we're talking about restorative justice, the goal is for a voice to be given to all people involved. And it's really hard for kids, but they have to identify who they impacted. And sometimes it's a really large group of people. The focus, again, is on repairing relationships or harm that was done. And it's to build skills so that students can do this on their own. Either way, students are held accountable for their actions. And sometimes this is hard to see or believe because you probably grew up in a scenario where if you made a mistake, there was a consequence and it was pretty severe. And that is how it's viewed as being handled. In this scenario, it's really more about the hard work of repairing damage versus a consequence that may or may not apply to the infraction. I think this quote here is really applicable to discipline and conflict resolution, and it's going to help guide us away from, those punitive responses to more of a restorative response. So if a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach or we punish. And when we're speaking of restorative practices, we want to teach. We want to teach how to behave, respond, and restore. So this screen here has links to, like I said, tons of different resources from really all over the world. And I do think that a lot of them are very valuable. A lot of these podcast links are from a podcast called The Cult of Pedagogy, and the facilitator interviews lots of different people about restorative practices and what it looks like in schools. A lot of the talk is about high school. However, even if you're middle school, elementary, it's still valuable. And some videos of how talk circles go on. And then some links to some articles. I do want to preface by saying a lot of what you read or hear or see about restorative practices will start by saying we need to have a talk circle. And I totally understand that in the classroom setting, especially if you are the teacher, it's not always feasible to just stop what you're doing and circle up with however many kids you need to. However, I do believe that we can still teach those skills, and hopefully these tech tools will help get that conversation going. So we know that teaching skills, whether it's academic or behavior, it's time consuming. And oftentimes discipline is time consuming, but I really like this. Either way, we spend time meeting students' emotional needs by filling their cup with love, or we spend time dealing with the behaviors caused from their unmet needs. Either way, we spend the time. And when I think about this quote, I kind of reflect on maybe practices I did in the classroom or my first few years as assistant to the principal. It's time consuming when students are not following the expectations. You know that there's parents to reach out to, there's calming the student down and comforting them, making sure they're not hurt, all of these different things. But using the approach of let's repair this damage, let's repair the relationships, because that's what matters most and is most important to our schools, is a way better use of time, in my opinion, versus excluding kids from activities or having that really punitive response. So let's talk about repairing the harm. So when we're talking about repairing the harm, it's adults are doing things with students to help fix the issues that we know are theirs. It's not for the adults to own, it's really for the kids to own, rather than adults doing things to them. So there's a few steps. First, we have to identify the harm and the stakeholders. So I can reflect back on a few times that I've followed this process and had two students who were riding the bus and they were just being physical and unsafe on the bus. So we had to identify what was the harm and who are the stakeholders. So not only did the two students physically hurt each other, they also harmed the riders around them, the bus driver, and their families, who were very worried when they got this news. So we had to walk through doing those steps. The second part is to consider how the behaviors affected others. This can be hard for kids to imagine, like, well, why does the bus driver involved in this? And having students think about how might they be feeling? How might the kindergartner sitting across from them be feeling? And then this is the part that students need the most help with and typically takes the most time, is to create and carry out the plan to repair the harm. And the tech tools I'm going to show you they're really just choices that guide students to be able to do this. And again, we're trying to move away or look at the spectrum from punitive to permissive. Sometimes it can be viewed, if we're just having students come together and talk and make a plan, that it's viewed as being like we're allowing this kind of behavior, when that's really not the case, because the steps that students have to take actually are very hard work. And a lot of times there's a natural consequence where they just have to miss out on some of the fun things they want to do. So I'd like to show you these 3 resources that can help students repair the harm on their own. All of these are links, and again, it'll force a copy for you. I've already done that, so I'm going to go ahead and jump over here to the different resources. So this one had the bell work for us, but it's called Repair the Damage or Repair the Harm. And the first step is, the way I would use this, especially if you're trying to have students do it independently, is have students open a Chromebook, force a copy for themselves, and they can start moving through it on their own. This is a really great option because not only is it shared with you, but it could be shared with the family or whoever else is involved to see the hard work students have done. You can also use this as a print version, and the check marks and things that students use can be on Velcro. But the first step in all of these is for students to get calm. We know that we can't make progress when students are really in this heightened state of mind. So it says move the check mark to show which calming exercise you will try, and then try it. You can see there's 6 steps here. Typically, I have students do this. They want to use a fidget. So they move that check mark. It is important to make sure that when you're having students use this tool, you have these things available. So if you're going to offer fidgets, just make sure 1 or 2 are available for them. The next slide here is what happened. And I really like this slide because it narrows it down to specifically like how did a student impact someone else. As you probably know, when you ask students what happened, it's a really confusing story, but on this page, students can pick 1 or 2 things that happen out of all of these different options. So one that we see a lot is I did something unsafe. They can move the check mark there, or I hurt someone. Those 2 usually go hand in hand. But you can see there's lots of different options, as well as the blank one that says something else. From there, students have to reflect on what they were thinking at the time. This is a really important step because it's often very, very insightful to the teacher or grown-up, and we can help meet those needs and help them create a plan for repair as long as they answer this one. And this has, to me, been the most valuable part of this whole process. So what were you thinking at the time? If we're thinking about our students on the bus. All right, so they were able to tell me they wanted to be included or belong, and they wanted that attention and connection. So this was a great way to open the conversation about what are some safe ways to do this on the bus. Can we find a partner for you to sit on the bus that you can feel included with, things of that nature. The next step here is identifying who else was affected and how those people might feel. So again, this is moving these circles. So in this scenario of the bus, classmates, but the students also were able to identify that the bus driver was impacted because they were really worried when people were being unsafe. And they can identify the emotions. So bus driver was feeling afraid. Classmates and other bus riders were also feeling afraid. And specifically between these 2 students, they were hurt. Oops. Next is the students have to identify the consequences of their actions. And again, if students are doing this on a Chromebook, this is pretty interesting because you can have multiple students doing it and then they can all come together to share their answers, and that can be pretty powerful. So again, students look here on the bus, somebody was hurt, so that check mark can be moved. And this one came up, I lost someone's trust in me, meaning the bus driver lost trust that they could be safe in their seats as they were riding home. And the last slide here is what can you do next time? So this is where students can start developing that plan and carrying it out by thinking about what they can do next time. Again, tons and tons of ideas, but sometimes they'll pick something else. And also you'll see in these other two resources I'm going to share with you, there's other ways to repair the damage or do some accountability. So these students chose to stop and think before they do something and to follow the directions because the bus driver was asking them to be safe. So again, these kinds of prompts help students be a little bit more reflective about their choices and put the ownership in their own hands to repair that damage. So this was called repairing the damage. The next slides that I have here, this is just for conflict resolution. Again, the idea is to move check marks. This one has a few more calm ideas, and it also has the size of the problem here. This tool is specific when maybe you have a more minor conflict between two students, and sometimes you just don't have the time to pull them aside and be like, what are we going to do? What's your side? What's her side? This instead tells the student, here's some tools to help you. Once you make your choice, I'll help you carry out that choice, but they need to figure out how they want to handle it. So it says to solve this problem, I will. It says to pick a first choice and a backup choice. Again, there's pictures and images to help guide students. And the last slide is some prompts to help students communicate how they're feeling. So the I message I will use is I felt blank when blank. And then I really like that last sentence because it helps students repair the damage or make an action plan. And there's tons of different emotions here that they can move the circles to. And then this is a little reflection question at the end. So this one's a little less involved, but with a few uses, students probably don't even need the tech tool and they could walk themselves through it. Last but not least, the tech tool I want to share with you is called an accountability project. This might be more appropriate for our older students or upper elementary, but after students have either gone through the repair the damage prompts or the conflict resolution, they then need to create a project and present it to those impacted. So you can see there's some prompts here and they can type their responses. So this could just be a Google Doc that is shared with the student or copied. But again, it's really all of those same questions, but more in a written format. So once they've done all the reflecting, the part 2 is the project where they have to develop an artifact. So they can make a Google Slides presentation, a poster, or a letter, and they have to determine who is the audience. Who are they going to present this to in order to move forward and repair that damage? As you can see here, there's some things that must be included in their presentation. This project is time consuming, and maybe if a student has to have in-school suspension or things like that, it can be carried out more independently, and it still does the same job of that hard work of repairing the damage. So again, those are 3 tools that are focused on restorative justice. However, they use tech tools to hopefully give you more time in the classroom and guide those students independently. So back to the presentation, I have found a lot of success with these tools. Of course, working with students is always emotional for the kids and sometimes for the grown-ups. It's time consuming, but it's so important. And I will say that when you're speaking to students, to families, to teachers, if everyone's on board with this repair the damage, it can be really, really effective.